Well, welcome everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes after 4, so we will begin. But before we do that, I just want to welcome you to this session, our Student Professional Development Grant panel. Dagotea, good afternoon. My name is Veronica Hirsch. I'm Cho'okonada. From my mother, I'm Chiricahua Apache. And I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the Career Readiness and Employment TCU Programs Officer at the American Indian College Fund. And I will turn it over quickly to my colleague, Anna Marie, so that she can briefly introduce herself as well.
Skillsets, Anna Marie Stevens. I am from Southern Arizona, from the Tohono O'odham Nation, and far bottom part of Arizona near the Mexico border. I am the part of the Career Readiness and Employment team as the project administrator. I just started like this semester, and it's been a privilege. I actually come from a TCU background. I worked under higher education for a number of years, over 15 years, but a lot of it was at Tohono O'odham Community College in different capacity. The last job I had at TOCC was a transition coordinator, so I helped students who were transitioning from TOCC to universities and ran a couple of grants and one with American Indian College Fund. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you so much for that, Anna Marie. So to begin, this is where we get to have a fun interactive portion in our panel. So you see the title, Student Professional Development Grant Panel, but this is the time for those of you who are joining us, if you have your smartphone handy, if it's fully charged, or maybe it's at 5% like mine is usually, but if you can take out your smartphone, and if you can go to menti.com, we'd really like to hear from you in a word cloud format. What is your gut reaction when you hear this phrase, professional development? What comes to mind? It could be anything. It might be a phrase, it might be a person, it might be a color, it might be a TV show, whatever the case may be. What comes to mind when you hear these words, professional development? So if you would please be so kind as to go to menti.com and go ahead and type in the code that you see there listed, 17298353. We're really interested in what you think. So we're going to take a couple moments for everyone to have an opportunity to provide your feedback. And if you're having difficult accessing that, you can also provide a response in the chat if you're not able to get to that menti.com. Thank you. This is honest. I appreciate it. So far we have somebody who has said intimidating when we hear this phrase, professional development. We also see, and I'll share this in just a moment, conference, training, skills, developing. Great, thank you. We have a few more responses coming in, and I'm going to share that screen in just a moment. So again, what comes to mind when you hear this phrase, these two words, professional development? Does it make you feel excited? Does it make you feel uptight? Does it make you feel overwhelmed? Does it make you feel innovative? What comes to mind? And so with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen once more so that we can see the lovely word cloud that all of you collaboratively have created. So we have a number of responses. Thank you everyone for playing along, for participating. So as I asked, what is your gut reaction to the words professional development? We see a range of responses. This is really interesting. We see excited, improvement, training, waster, building a person's work, westernizing, skill growth, rebuilding, the color blue, work, all of these things. Thank you so much. Thank you for being thoughtful and intentional about your responses. And if you have more than one, feel free to continue typing those in. But I think as we look at this word cloud and we see what continues to come out, it's this idea of it's a mindset. And do I feel prepared or unprepared? Am I intimidated by this? Does this feel kind of awkward or westernizing? Does it make me feel that this is doable or possible? These are things to consider when we are saying, this phrase professional development. So thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to return to sharing my screen that has our couple little slides that we want to share with you at this point. Thank you for your patience as my technology decides it wants to work or not. So before we begin with our esteemed panel, which they will introduce themselves momentarily, as I mentioned, Anna Marie and I work within our career readiness and employment area. And we have a specific tagline, and it's here, as you can read it for yourselves. But we try to provide resources that are culturally grounded. And I'm going to say try. I'm not going to pretend that we always are able to make that mark. However, we try our best to do so. And what do we mean by this idea of culturally grounded values? Well, I'm glad you asked that in your mind. We have 6 principles that we try to follow, and these are on our CRE webpage that you see listed here. And this next slide has it in a bigger font. But we refer to these principles as the 6 R's. As you see, they all begin with the letter R. And these 6 R's, these guiding principles, the definitions that you can read for yourselves here, we're very intentional about emphasizing these R's, especially in the ways that we try to provide opportunities and resources for our scholars, for our relatives, our professional relatives, to be able to show up in ways that are authentic to themselves and their lived experiences, and that still provide them with opportunities to be creative, to be innovative. So I'm not going to read out these definitions because you can see them here, but I do want to highlight one in particular that we, in our work, continue to emphasize. And I think you'll hear it discussed during this afternoon as well. And that's the R of reciprocity. Every semester, fall and spring, we at the American Indian College Fund send out a fall survey and a spring survey to all of the scholars that we're able to support with scholarship funding. And we ask some open-ended questions of our scholars, one of them being, what is one or the main reason for you, your choice to go to school? And it's an open-ended question. And overwhelmingly, the responses that we have gotten over the past couple of years, probably at this point about 78% out of a total of maybe 1,200 responses, our scholars say they want to give back. And so we take our scholars seriously. We believe them when they say they want to give back. So this is why the R of reciprocity, it's not that it's the most important R, but this seems to be the R, the principle that our scholars have identified as one that's really significant and really important to them. And so for that reason, we really try to be intentional about including all the R's in the work that we do, with a special emphasis on the R of reciprocity. And so with that, we provide student professional development grants. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Anna Marie.
Okay. So every semester, we provide opportunities for students to apply for student professional development grants. This is my first time, like I said, doing this. It was a learning experience, and we had a number of students who had applied. I think we want to say like 45 students who had applied. We probably awarded close to like 31, 33. And what it basically is, it is an opportunity for students to get $2,500 to help them explore professionally, looking at different career options, something that's going to help you grow, gain some kind of skills, some hard skills, some transferable skills, something that's going to help you long-term in regards to like getting some kind of training or providing some kind of service or doing research. And it's just to help you explore. It's an exploration opportunity. Like I said, this is one of the great things that American Indian College Fund offers. I was blown away when I first came in. I was like, oh, this is something we do. What a great opportunity. And I wish more students applied for this. And then, like I said, reading them was amazing to see the brilliant minds of the scholars that we fund about what their goals are. And it ranged from getting a certificate for Google. It ranged for cultural programming. It also was doing some research. It also was, one student was a carpenter and she wanted to do a project in her community and she did a bathroom renovation. So it varies from anybody. And like we just explaining that. And so what we do is we send out an application process and people have to explain what their project's about, how it's going to help them develop, what they plan on doing, if there's like a timeline, they have to create a budget. And I know it does seem intimidating, but it was really helpful for us to like meet with you individually and talk to you about this and have some conversation with it. So it was a great experience for me, and I also feel like it's a good experience for anybody. So I highly encourage you, anyone who's here, please take advantage of this opportunity. And then you're going to hear from students that have applied for it in the past and this past spring. I can't hear you, Veronica. Are you there, Veronica? Oh no. Veronica, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here. I
Okay.
was being a ghost. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So without further ado, we do want to welcome our esteemed panel. As you see here, their names, their tribal citizenship affiliation, and just looking at this, I'm impressed. But we're very pleased to invite Jeremy, Shayna, and Alex to share a bit about their personal experiences being awarded a student professional development grant. So with that, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if I can call upon an individual to begin, Shayna, would you please begin by introducing yourself?
Certainly. Good evening, Yate. Shayna Nez Yinchia. Techini Nishle, Ashihi Bashichin, Tanizani Dashache Kantlachini Dashanale. Lukaje de Nasha, Ado, Nabaane, New Mexico. Hello, everyone. My name is Shayna Nez. I just introduced myself in Dinebizad, just letting you know about my clans and where I'm originally from, as well as where I'm currently residing in Bloomfield, New Mexico at the moment. Again, I'm a PhD candidate with Arizona State University in Justice Studies. So just happy to be here. Thankful for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayna. Jeremy, would you please go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Yeah, bonjour. Gichi Makwanji Nakasma Quadadum, Miigwech Numgum. My name is Jeremy Lattiser, and I'm from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. And I'm I'm working on my doctoral degree at the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota. And I'm really grateful and really appreciative for this opportunity to share today my experience with the SPD. So, miigwech.
Jeremy. And Alex, if you could please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yate, Shikedo Shidana, Alex Richard Zal, Yeneshe, Ciso Sakab, Dinasha, Klashchi, Dineneshe, Nazozit Benet Bashachin, Nesheja Dene Dashache, Nazozit Dene Dashanelli. My name is Alex Richard Zal. I'm originally from CISO's COD chapter, which is also known as Burnham, New Mexico. It's about 40 miles south of Farmington. I am currently a third-year political science PhD student at the University of California, San Diego, where I study American and comparative politics to better understand and describe the experiences of Indigenous Americans and our interactions with not only our own Indigenous governments, but in interactions with the United States through federalism. So my research focuses extensively on Indigenous American political behavior, geography, and economy to not only provide policy information back home to reservations and support Indigenous nations, but to hopefully educate the world and treat its Indigenous people a little better each day. So I'm excited to be here and proud to be able to share my experiences with the Student Professionalization Grant. I'm also happy to provide any information on grad school and things of that nature if folks are interested afterwards.
For general questions within our chat, and for those of our individuals who might not be able to see this, I'm going to also copy them into the Q&A session. So for those of you who are tuning in, we are only going to have our panelists have their video cameras and their microphones on. But if you look on the bottom, you might see 3 little dots that say more. There is a question and answer session. And feel free to go ahead and type in any questions that you may have within that environment, and we will do our best to answer them. So with that, I'm just going to reread the 4 questions, and I'm just going to ask Shayna, Jeremy, and Alex in whatever order, whatever question speaks to you, or maybe there's something else that you specifically want to emphasize. Please don't feel restricted to these 4 questions that we've offered, but I'll just go in order. The first being, how did your completion of your SPD grant project help you think innovatively? Just for those of our participants who are tuning in, every person was evaluated on 2 aspects of their grant proposal. One, we wanted to see, how creative is this person being? What kind of innovative approach, a technique, maybe software, whatever the format was. How are you being creative? How are you looking at this problem or this project from an interesting perspective, maybe one that is not usually considered? So that's what we mean by this idea of innovation. And the other way that our esteemed panel was considered, and the reason why they received this SPD grant, is we wanted to know how specifically their project was going to help them, not only as a person, in their personal lives, but also as a professional. And again, with that idea of some of the R's in mind, how did their project, the innovative way they created and crafted their project, allow them maybe to show up in intentional ways, upholding some of those R's of respect, responsibility, reciprocity, reflection, relationship, and redistribution. So just to give you a little bit of backstory, why we asked that question, and again, the question being, how did your completion of your project help you think innovatively? The next question we asked is, how did your project increase your professional confidence? And as we know, we can all do with a bit of a good dose of professional confidence, because we know sometimes when we hear professional development, as we saw in the word cloud, not always do we feel super confident in being able to do that in a way that makes sense to us. So again, that question, how did your project help you maybe overcome an obstacle, and by doing so, increase your professional confidence? The third question, how did your project help you develop your professional expertise and skill sets? Each one of our panelists already has an amazing set of skills, life experience, professional work experience. So how did this little grant help you, develop that and refine that even more? And then lastly, we really appreciate any advice that you can offer to someone who wants to apply, whether it's for this specific SPD grant or something like it. And they might feel intimidated, as we saw some of the responses, the honest feedback, and we appreciate the honesty in the word cloud exercise that we had at the beginning. So once again, those questions are in the chat. Hopefully others can see them as well. And I'm just going to open this up to whomever feels comfortable beginning with one of your responses to one of these questions.
Don't mind sharing. So I think with the question that was first raised after completing my project, and so just to kind of give you context, the photo you see in my background is of the event that I did propose for this PD grant. And it was to, again, bring these students from the BFA Creative Writing program from Diné College to a reading festival in Flagstaff. It's called the Northern Arizona Book Festival. And because this is I wouldn't say first of its kind, the festival has been around for so long, but trying to be more inclusive to tribal colleges, especially near Navajo Nation, because it's in Flagstaff. I thought about, the challenges that our students continuously face, which is traveling and lodging, whether it's finances or whether it's their need to get to and from. And so I constantly see that challenge reflected on the Navajo Nation within our campuses here, and then also with any other outside or external opportunities. And so what I really wanted to focus in was just that sort of financial burden that these students face at the time. And for me, thinking about it innovatively, I really had to think about relationships, one of the R's that you've mentioned, and kind of had to expand that further to think about social capital or networking in this sense. My dissertation that I didn't mention is looking at emerging BIWOC authors, meaning BIPOC, women of color authors, the emerging writers they are, and what it takes to get to that publishing stage of their first work. And so this sort of sense that I'm bringing is more geared toward literary arts, writers, creative writers in that respect. And, trying to figure out how to navigate this sort of literary world. Again, it really wasn't meant for us, but now that we have more Indigenous writers that have storytelling, and storytelling in itself isn't something that, again, we were told to do with paper and pen. It was more so oral in that sense. So we've had storytelling for so long, but what would it be? How would it be when we had to navigate that sort of world now? And so with this opportunity, I had to think about it very largely in order to get down to the narrow, to the local, to the more focused of these students that you see in the background. And so my networking, for me, I am still considered an emerging writer. I don't have my first book published yet, but I am looking at this phenomena of how other POC women get to that stage. How do they have to network? What sort of entrepreneur skills that isn't taught to us in academics, but how do we get to that stage of being confident and talking about our work as if we know it, so well and best. We get to that process. And so all of that to say, I had to really think about my relationships, who I'm gravitating toward. I'm fortunate enough to say that the board for the No AZ Festival are some of the authors and writers that I've worked with in previous times. They're also doing community work just as much as I am. And I found those relationships to be very valuable because we're all, in a sense, in this together, trying to bring these writers more into these spaces so they can feel confident as well. For most of the ones that I've met along my journey, again, none of this was ever taught to me or even to the ones that I had to work with. We've had all these stories of similarities that navigating this literary world is challenging in itself, but how are we going to make it more fruitful for our youth? And I think right now with the work we're doing, it comes hand in hand in that respect. And so for me, I guess I'll kind of blend that last question in with this for everyone that's listening. When you think about your projects, think about it very largely. Think about it with all the possibilities in the world if you could. Think about it there, and then start to narrow it. Really start to focus in on how this really, presumptuous challenge, solution, how is that going to be possible when you look at it from a very local, narrowed perspective, even for people that you're trying to help. Look at it from that point of view. Then also ask yourself, what did I wish someone taught me, gave advice to me in order for me to navigate any of these spaces? That's what I would want to say. And then also think about your relationships. Think about who you work with, who you work best with, who has given you inspiration in that sort of regard. Because I think with all of that to say, this is how I was able to bring 6 of these students out. We had one that tuned in from Zoom. She's currently a student. She's from the Utah area. So we had this sort of as a hybrid event. We made it more accessible in that way, because we know that, our relatives really can't be traveling too far sometimes. Accessibility in that respect becomes our positive most key ally, I guess, especially right now that we're on a virtual panel, it's accessible in that way. So I had to think about that too, about how we could be inclusive to our relatives or their supporters, the students that you see in the back. How can the rest of, their relatives be there or try to be there and support? So that's really what, as far as the project was concerned, the most challenging part that I had to think about. And then thinking about, again, from an internal perspective, in order to get to that external sort of outcome. But you just have to, again, believe in the work that you're doing. Do not falter within negative advices or people thinking that, oh, that is way too big, that's too much. I've been told so many times that my priorities are everywhere, that you have so many big ideas, but they don't seem very structured. I've been told that so many times, but I still continue to do the work. So I'm going to say this, don't ever stop and don't ever let someone tell you no. Don't take no for an answer. Believe in yourself, believe in the work that you do. And, something like this, as far as this picture, could be a really positive outcome for you, could definitely can make you want to continue the work and why it's important. I'll end it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shana. Thank you for those words of wisdom, and thank you for also, being vulnerable and sharing some of the criticism that you've gotten in the past. And really, I would say that what people don't understand is that you are a global thinker, and global thinkers very often get told that you're doing too much, or you're trying to do too much, or it's too big and it's unwieldy. And it's like, well, no, because if you're a global thinker, you can see, much like a spider web, there's like that central core stabilizing force, but how the spokes on a spider web radiate outwards and touch in all directions. So thank you for not taking no. I appreciate that. So Jeremy or Alex, is there a question, one of the ones that was offered, or perhaps maybe not? Maybe there's just something that you want to share specific to your project, to your point of view, in terms of your experience receiving an SPD grant.
Hey, this is Jeremy. I feel like Michael Jackson in that meme eating popcorn right now. Like I was just listening to Shana. I was like, you can keep going, Shana. You're doing such a good job. I find it really interesting. You did an outstanding job. I'm a aspiring writer too. So, man, that's interesting what you said. Thank you for sharing. I decided to work with our college students here at Turtle Mountain Community College, and also with people in the recovering community in our community. And so I ran sweat with them, because a lot of people, it's a healing process, and that's where the innovation comes in for me. Is I'm also a person in recovery, so I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable that way. I found that when early recovery, that the songs meant something to me, and I was connected to self and to others. And I was kind of unsure if I should even apply for this SPD, timing wise, with my academics and my job and being a father, other things. But I realized that, service work, really is about, it totally is about helping others, because the more I help you, the less I think about me. And so, that's why I did this with the recovery community and our college students. And I worked in retention, and I work in TRIO on my college campus, and we want our students to feel like they're part of this community, this campus community. And so running sweat on our college campus, and I'm sure a lot of other tribal colleges, I would assume, I guess I don't want to be too presumptuous, that they do run ceremonies of some sort, whether it's sweat lodge or maybe just arts and crafts of some sort where there's a connectedness to their roots and their culture. And that is where that was my angle in this SPD. And I was really, really excited because running ceremony, I do pour water in my community, and I run some other ceremonies. But I also helped them make some drums, some hand drums. And that was quite the experience because we had some young girls come in, and we had an elder and we had a young gentleman that was kind of in between. And to just kind of see like how the day started off and how we progressed along, and how I showed them a few different ways how we can tie these drums. And it was about cultural enrichment, preservation, revitalization. We can't do these things unless we're brave enough to step out of our norm. I too, wish I knew my language better, but I know the ceremonies. And so to be around that and to pass that on, it's a transfer of knowledge. It's a transfer of what we have in our culture. I may not know the most, but every little bit I know I cherish dearly with my heart, because again, and when I was sitting there in early recovery, those songs came to me, and I knew where I belonged. And so I had that sense of belonging inside of me, and that's what we try to encourage to people, because education is really the cornerstone to my life. I was raised by my grandmother at a young age, and she passed away when I was in my second year of college, but she would always tell me, you need to finish school. If you finish school, the heaviest thing you're ever going to lift is a pencil. She couldn't stand the idea of me doing blue collar work, her baby. So I finished school, and I know she's looking down. I got my master's when I was 22 years old, and I'm going to be 50 this year. So I'm back in school, going at it again. And, next year at this time, I'll be defending. And I've been so blessed through education and culture. And you talk about how this transfer of knowledge works. For me, maybe in some regards, maybe it's not, that important to other Indigenous people, but in my community, it's very important to my tribal members that they understand who they are, their clan, their name. When they enter that forever hunting ground, we're told that we're going to be greeted, but we have to know our name, our spirit name. So just those things that maybe are overlooked or taken for granted, to share those types of things in our culture. I'm very blessed that way. And to teach them songs, one of the other things inside of my SPD was I put in for hand drums. And after I had thought about it and was awarded, I thought, oh darn, I wish I would have rethought this. I thought maybe a big drum would have been better. So maybe I'll reapply again, because you want people, if they're going to learn these songs, you want them there at that drum, because if we make them hand drums and they all go their own direction, they may not learn. It might just sit on the wall or somewhere, So I'm thinking, after the fact, after I was rewarded, I had hope maybe for a revision, because I believe a big drum would have a bigger impact if we were able to have a couple times a week as we practice ceremony songs and get into that lodge and do other things. Maybe it'll continue to grow. So to me, the impacts were deep. I'm getting chills thinking about it. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful to be able to do this in my community with my people and my relatives and my children and my grandchildren. So it's really just, I'm blessed this way. And again, this is our culture, and goes back to this, one of the 7 R's, this redistribution, our 7th generation. I was sitting listening to Anton Troyer here a couple of weeks ago, and 7 generations, that's 20 years as a generation. So I'm sitting in the middle right now with 5. So I'm like, wow, I'm pretty amazed that where I'm at right now, because not too long from now, I'm going to be an elder. So anyway, I'm very, very grateful for this, and thank you for listening.
For that thoughtful response, Jeremy, and thank you for, yes, relating it back to the R's. And then the good news is you can reapply for SPD grant. Anna Marie, would you go ahead and unmute yourself and explain for not just Jeremy, but others who are part of this conversation about that process?
So every semester we will put an announcement out. It is sent out to everyone and it's also posted on our website for people to apply. It does usually have a deadline date on there. However, this past year we had a number of people still applying afterwards, which so we're open. And so I would highly encourage you to apply. Like I said, you do have to like fill out what your project's about, how it's going to help you, what you're going to benefit from, creating a budget. If you have questions, we can help you walk you through that process. And even if you're not selected, so this year we had a first round of funding and we had students who were selected the first round of funding. And then we met with other students, like, how can you improve this? And how can we help you improve your proposal? So that's really helpful. So funding may be available in the summertime. It definitely is going to be limited because we did find a lot of people in the spring semester and our budget year ends in June. So it's going to be a short turnaround. Right now I'm looking at trying to see how much money is available. So how many people we can be picking up. So if you are interested, we will be sending it out shortly.
Thank you, Anna Marie, for explaining that. And yes, as Anna Marie mentioned, the good news is that we've had situations where we've had scholars who've applied in successive semesters. And again, you know, it's not a guarantee, but as Anna Marie expressed, as long as individuals are really able to thoughtfully and intentionally, you know, explain what they're doing and why. And this is really about, I would say this in terms of the application. It's about approaching it almost as a type of ceremony. And forgive me if that sounds presumptuous, but we've actually had this conversation internally within career readiness and employment, that even some of these things that might feel sterile, like even those words, professional development or student professional development grant, which doesn't necessarily read as something super native or native-y, right? But as long as you bring your authentic self with your whole range of lived experience, and you choose to show up with like we've already witnessed over the course of this conversation, with authenticity, even with vulnerability, even with maybe a form of radical vulnerability. When you do that, that spirit of authenticity gets conveyed in your application. It truly does. And if you even treat it, if you need to pray over it, I'm not being silly, I'm being literal. If you need to do that, if you need to offer medicine, if you need to think about the ways that it is going to uphold any one of those R's that might resonate, here's another R, with you. Or maybe there's another principle or value that we haven't had listed that you feel is super important to you. It's part of your personal story, your professional development, and you think that you can create a project where it can benefit others. We highly encourage you to do that. You know, this is not a situation where we are expecting applicants to tell us what we want to hear. This is a situation where we want to be able to be helpful and useful and supportive as you show up as your fully authentic self, with your whole range of lived experience, with your even some of your concerns, some of your hesitancy, as Anna Marie said. You know, we're here to help you through this process, not to say yours wasn't good enough, but to say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? And to help drill down into what that process is. And in the course of that, like for many of us in a ceremonial context, sometimes things happen and come out in ceremony that we didn't necessarily plan for or budget for or anticipate, but here they are. And yet we are creating a safe, I'm even going to use a strong word, sacred space for us together to figure that out and to bring hope and healing and excitement and encouragement and hopefully inspiration in the process. So I will now want to stop talking and turn it over to Alex. Alex, we really appreciate you sharing some of your experience going through this process, this student professional development process.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have lots of thoughts on all the questions posed, but difficult to keep all those thoughts contained while being respectful and trying to listen to colleagues, but I'll do my best to reiterate as many thoughts as possible. So just for context, the Student Professionalization Development Grant that I was participating in was for the fall semester this past year. And it was primarily entailed with handling professional literacy expenses associated with ongoing fieldwork and traveling out of pocket to engage in collaborative research with my home reservation back home in the Navajo Nation. Specifically, I was engaged in projects with the Office of Navajo Government Development, which is an entity created after 1989 designed to design government reform solutions based on the interests of the people rather than coming up with random hypothetical situations and trying to guess what might be good. And the project that we started then is still under development. We're still working through it, and I've learned lots from my experiences being back home on the reservation. And so one of the main things that we come into conflict pretty early on after as we continued writing is there's a difficult balance between creating something that is supposed to be informative and engaging for Indigenous peoples, while still using a framework that's understandable for others. And more specifically, this dilemma came up where, right, my approach to research is fundamentally different than folks back home on the reservation because of different pedagogical traditions as well as understandings of how stories and research and ideas are conducted and evaluated, which did lead to some difficulties where I'm personally trained in how to use very westernized frameworks to understand and develop and gain knowledge through what some people call the scientific method, but might also be critiqued as just using numbers to try to quantify things. Whereas other folks were more interested in trying to figure out what's the bigger story at hand. How do we get Masana, Otto, Che, or Grandma and Grandpa to understand these complex discussions that we're trying to have? And this inherent tension reflects more into what it means to be an Indigenous scholar today, especially engaged in research, especially for those that want to engage in research that contribute back to the communities we investigate, as well as our home reservations and other entities across, maybe not just in the US, but broadly for Indigenous people elsewhere, where it comes to question whether or not this is about being a researcher is about taking these Western frameworks, this Western approach to knowledge producing, and using that to understand Indigenous peoples, or is it outright rejecting those ideas and using something from our cultural heritage and traditions? Because prior to colonization, manifest destiny, and lots of history, Indigenous peoples were very well equipped to handle and answer questions for themselves. So this inherent tension also relates to more than that, because Indigenous scholars are going to come from all walks of life and backgrounds. I may have started life on the reservation, but I was fortunate to grow up all over the American Southwest, and I moved around a lot. Other folks stayed on the reservation their whole lives. Some folks have very limited connections with their ancestral lands and cultural connections, where even some individuals may live on reservations, but those reservations have histories of forcible relocation that fundamentally altered their societies in ways that we can never reconcile. And it goes further than that when we think about what does it mean to be Indigenous, right? There's lots of definitions for Indigenous identities. When I think about it a number of ways. I've heard lots of explanations. Some people have said being Indigenous is based on your heritage, right, your kinship. But when I describe that back home on the reservation, I tell people, yes, my mom's full-blooded Navajo. My dad is Chinese, so he has no Navajo in him. And then I get some dirty looks from time to time, depending on where you're at. But that's just the fact of life, and I'm sure others can relate, depending on what it's like being a multiracial and having intersectional identities. But these aspects demonstrate that these various viewpoints and walks of life can provide lots of unique ways to approach something like research or knowledge gathering. And so when it comes to grant work and working on student professionalization opportunities, all of these unique backgrounds and perspectives provide great opportunities to show that varying viewpoint and bring attention to views that others might not be thinking about because of the way, what the status quo might be in a given location. For example, one time during the summer, I got into a pretty big not big argument, but an argument nonetheless with my coworkers discussing why should we even consider approaching research on the Navajo Nation using quantitative methods when we do things very qualitatively, theoretically, and through smaller assessments of like focus groups and things of that nature. And my argument is if the goal of education is to promote critical thinkers, right, we should be able to teach our people the methods that have been used to describe Indigenous peoples for the last 40, 50 years or so by non-Indigenous scholars. And so that way we can do it better ourselves. Secondly, right, we can still do existing ways of knowledge producing, relying on those qualitative, theoretical, traditional, and cultural foundations to how we ascertain knowledge. But we can enhance those by looking at how normative behavior is and looking at patterns across data. And more often than not, what we're going to find is that we're supporting the claims that we were already making before and just make it more convincing for non-Indigenous audiences. So either way, to me, it seems to be a win-win where we not only help educate students to be more innovative and think about things in lots of different ways, but then provide lots of different answers to the same questions we've been asking forever, and hopefully move on to new interesting debates. With that said, it comes to thinking about, again, student professionalization. When it comes to student professionalization, right, because we have all these varying backgrounds and these walks of life and these different origins, and our own individual histories with our nations, our kinships and relationships, we generally think about how we can think about things in a different perspective, where just by engaging in a student professionalization grant, right, as an individual, as an applicant, that's already walking in a new frontier that our ancestors were never able to do. And since there are so few Indigenous peoples in the country and the world and so forth, right, each step going forward in our own paths is a step that's being laid down for the next generation, and something to keep in mind. Whether it's you're focusing on the sciences, technology, engineering, and math, whether you engage in the social sciences, the arts, humanities, whether you're active in language preservation efforts, right? These are all instances in which, as students, you're going forward and charting new paths for Indigenous peoples that haven't been walked in a long time or haven't been walked ever. And with that, it comes to my personal goals in studying and doing this work in terms of political science and answering interesting questions regarding to the intersection of politics, both in the US and how it affects Indigenous people. To answer interesting questions and then hopefully make myself redundant in the next 20 years by teaching the next generation of scholars to do things better than I do. And while I suspect and encourage challenges to the ways I approach things like research, taking very quantitative approaches as opposed to more traditional methods, I'm hopeful that in the future, someone more equipped, more knowledgeable, and more culturally attuned can pick up the stones and build something better. I believe those are the main points, but I will just leave off and encourage everyone to even just engage in the application process for an SPD grant, because it's a useful skill to start building, whether you end up wanting to pursue research and being a graduate student or a professor one day, or if you go and work in the industry, or go work in an industry somewhere, right? These are useful skills to be able to write strong, credible arguments, as well as convince others of your interesting and innovative viewpoints. But yeah, happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you for that thoughtful response, Alex. And I also appreciate your humility, acknowledging that, yes, whatever you're doing now is also laying down, breaking trail and hopefully forging a path that somebody else after will be able to continue to be inspired by your work and take it in their own direction. And I think that's something that, just as a person who had the pleasure and privilege of reading the SPD grant applications, just as my colleague Anna Marie said at the very beginning, feeling so inspired, not feeling small or dumb, but also acknowledging, wow, these individuals who are proposing these projects are doing thoughtful, amazing, innovative work in areas that I have never even considered. And yet they have, and they are, creating an opportunity not only for themselves to, let's say, ask creative questions or come up with creative solutions to something, but they're also creating, in the process of doing that, creating opportunities for other people. So as you mentioned, Alex, creating the conditions for win-win outcomes to happen. So thank you for that. We do have a couple questions in our chat and in the Q&A. So we have, actually, I'm going to begin first with the question in the chat and then the one in the Q&A. But the first question is, it looks like it's for you, Jeremy. You might have seen it. Christina mentioned or asked if you conduct any type of virtual cultural classes. And it looks like part of that question is motivated out of a desire to reconnect. And I think that's a desire, Christina, that's not unique just to you. I think for a lot of us, myself included, being a person also like you, Alex, of a multiracial background, having a mother who is Chiricahua Apache and a father who is Ashkenazim, German, Polish, and Russian Jewish, and myself having been raised entirely away outside of my own tribal community context, there have been at times this feelings of disconnect. So, Jeremy, if you feel comfortable answering that question and maybe even your thoughts about what a virtual cultural class might look like or any important considerations to bear in mind.
Sure. My response to, is it Christina, was to think about exactly what it is you're trying to accomplish, and I listed it as delivery. So, that's really important on what your objective would be as far as, if it's beading or if it's language. When we run sweat on our campus, it's a little different. So because we have strict elders and they're like no cameras, you got to be real careful on how you conduct yourself around sweat and Sundance. But there are some things that we can share real openly, and so to be sensitive about that, with COVID and adapting to hybrid flex learning, that type of thing, we've had to offer classes, our language classes and things like that. So on my campus specifically, there are classes that we can offer. And so check with other tribal colleges, maybe that are more aligned with you and in your tribal nation. But, certainly there's a myriad of tribes out there that have their culture probably into their TCUs. So I would always be willing to give you a point in a good direction and help assist the best way I can. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Jeremy. And then also, I'm sorry, it might be Christina. Sorry, Christina, if I've mispronounced your name. But you mentioned that you're from a California Indian community, and you might want to look up online. There's the California Indian Basket Weavers Association. It's a wonderful organization. It's been around for over 3 decades. And there are ample opportunities for people to engage in traditional basketry, as well as learn or relearn, reacquaint with various California Indian languages as well. So hopefully that can provide you with a little bit of a point in a direction.
And now
I'm
going to interrupt, Veronica. We
Yes,
are
go ahead.
talking
Thank
about
you.
our time frame.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Very close.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we might have time for the one question that I saw in the Q&A, and it looks like this question, looks like Alex, you're already typing an answer, so I'll leave that there. But it has to do with Navajo Nation governance, local governance authority, and very specific questions having to do with Navajo Nation governance. So thank you for this question. And I think you've been able to match with an expert. So I'm glad that Alex is part of this panel to hopefully answer that for you. Let's see, looks like we are at time. So I do want to thank, if everybody can just join me, you can hit your reactions, and thanking our amazing group of panelists. Thank you so much, all of you, for being so forthcoming and sharing your experiences as receiving this grant. And we appreciate your time.
And
thank you, everyone,
for being here. And also, I highly encourage everyone who's here listening, please take the time to apply. It's an amazing opportunity. Don't let it pass you by.
Thank you.
Thank you,
honor.
everyone. Enjoy your evening.
Appreciate this, being able to share.
Honestly, this wasn't enough time for everybody to share a lot of information. It was short.
For sure, for sure. For our panelists, I think if you don't mind just staying on for a moment, I think they're going to wrap up. I just want to make sure that you've all received communication from one of our other colleagues at the College Fund regarding, I'll wait until everybody else gets off, regarding some stuff. Thank you for being patient with us. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating. Thank you for keeping the chat lively. Thank you for all of your reactions that you gave throughout the conversation that we've had this afternoon with our esteemed panelists. And you can feel free to rejoin. I think we might already be wrapping up in our other kind of main lobby area. So thank you, everybody.